The German shepherd's amber eyes never left the oak door, even as the first snowflake of winter settled on his greying muzzle. 1,000 days. Detective Sarah Chen had counted every single one since she'd first spotted him there, a statue of unwavering devotion carved from muscle, bone, and an ache so profound it seemed to emanate from his very soul. "Max, come on, boy!" Her voice cracked as she knelt beside him on the frost-covered sidewalk of Maple Street. "She's not coming back." The dog's ears twitched at his name, the only sign he'd heard her at all. His massive frame remained rigid, positioned precisely 3 feet from the front steps of 1247 Maple Street, close enough to guard, far enough to show respect. The same spot he'd claimed on that horrible October morning when the ambulance had taken Eleanor Hartwell away for the last time. Sarah pulled her patrol jacket tighter against the November wind. As the neighborhood's beat cop for the past 15 years, she'd seen her share of heartbreak, but nothing had prepared her for this. Max wasn't just any dog. He was a decorated K-9 veteran, a Purple Heart recipient who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan before retiring to become Eleanor's service companion. The old woman had rescued him from a military retirement facility when nobody else wanted a war dog with PTSD. "The new owners called again," Sarah whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "They want you gone, Max. I can't keep deflecting animal control forever." Max's tail gave the slightest twitch, not a wag, but an acknowledgement. His gaze remained fixed on that door, as if sheer willpower could bring Eleanor back, could undo the heart attack that had stolen his second chance at peace. The house behind that door had stood empty for months now. Eleanor's estate was tied, up in probate, her distant nephew fighting with creditors while Max maintained his vigil. Neighbors left food and water, children whispered stories about the ghost dog, and Sarah had made it her mission to understand why this warrior refused to abandon his post. She'd researched Max's military record, spoken to his former handler who died in an IED explosion, interviewed Eleanor's few remaining friends. The pieces painted a picture of loyalty so fierce it transcended loss, but they didn't explain the intensity of his watch. Dogs grieved, yes, but this felt different, urgent, as if Max knew something the rest of them didn't. "What are you waiting for, boy?" Sarah murmured, running her fingers through his thick coat. She felt the scars beneath his fur, shrapnel wounds that had ended his military career, but not his sense of duty. "What do you know that we don't?" A gust of wind rattled the bare branches overhead, and Max's ears suddenly pricked forward. His body tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring. Sarah followed his gaze to the upstairs window, Eleanor's bedroom, where a shadow seemed to flicker behind the dusty glass. But that was impossible. The house had been empty for months. Max rose to his feet for the first time in hours, a low growl rumbling in his chest, not aggressive but warning. His hackles raised as he took one careful step toward the house, then another. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her service weapon as Max's growl deepened, his eyes locked on that upstairs window where the shadow had been. Then, as suddenly as it began, Max's growling stopped. He sat back down in his exact spot. But something had changed. His ears remained alert, his posture even more rigid than before. Whatever he'd sensed, it was still there. Sarah stared at the empty house, her cop instincts prickling. In all her years on the force, she'd learned to trust her gut, and right now it was telling her that Max's 1,000-day vigil wasn't about grief. It was about guardianship. But guarding what? 3 years earlier. The retirement ceremony at Fort Bragg had been mercifully brief. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison's casket, draped in an American flag, had been lowered into the ground while Max lay prostrate beside the grave. His service vest heavy with medals that meant nothing without his handler. Max had been Jake's shadow for 4 years, through 3 deployments and countless missions that had bonded them beyond the typical handler-dog relationship. Jake had saved Max from a kill shelter in Georgia, seeing potential in the young German shepherd that others had deemed too aggressive. In return, Max had saved Jake's life 17 times. Sarah had counted them all in his military file. 17 confirmed saves, from detecting IEDs to taking down insurgents who'd gotten too close to their unit. The 18th time, Max hadn't been fast enough. The IED that killed Jake had been buried deeper than usual, its scent masked by rotting garbage. By the time Max detected it, Jake was already reaching for what looked like a child's toy. The explosion had thrown Max 20 feet, embedding shrapnel in his left hip and ending his military career. Jake had died instantly. For months after the funeral, Max had been inconsolable. He refused to eat, wouldn't respond to commands, and had bitten 2 potential handlers during his re-evaluation. The military veterinarians recommended euthanasia. Too damaged, they said. Combat stress had broken him beyond repair. That's when Eleanor Hartwell had appeared. The 78-year-old retired school teacher had lost her husband in Vietnam and understood the particular ache of military loss. She'd read about Max in a veteran's newsletter, a war hero facing execution because grief had made him difficult, and driven 800 miles from her home in Ohio to claim him. "I don't need a perfect dog," she'd told the skeptical officials. "I need a dog who understands that sometimes survival looks like stubbornness." The first month in Eleanor's small house on Maple Street had been brutal. Max had destroyed furniture, howled through the night, and refused to let Eleanor out of his sight. She'd slept on the living room floor beside his crate, whispering stories about her late husband until Max's nightmares quieted. Slowly, painfully, they'd healed each other. Eleanor's arthritis made daily tasks difficult, and Max's protective instincts found new purpose in helping her navigate the world. He learned to retrieve her medications, to steady her on icy sidewalks, to sense when her blood pressure spiked and guide her to a chair. His military training adapted to civilian life. Patrol became evening walks, reconnaissance became grocery runs, and his fierce loyalty transferred completely to the gentle woman who'd saved him from execution. For 2.5 years, they'd been inseparable. Eleanor called him her guardian angel with 4 legs, and Max had seemed to find peace in protecting someone who valued his service over his scars. The morning Eleanor died, Max had tried to wake her as usual, nudging her hand with his muzzle. At precisely 6:30 a.m., when she didn't respond, he'd barked, sharp, urgent sounds that brought neighbor Mrs. Patterson running. The paramedic said Eleanor had died peacefully in her sleep, her hand resting on Max's head, as if even in death she'd sought comfort in his presence. Max had refused to leave the ambulance bay, had to be physically removed when they took Eleanor's body to the morgue. That's when he'd claimed his spot outside the house, not pacing or whining like a typical grieving pet, but settling into a watchful position that spoke of military precision and absolute commitment. Sarah had been the responding officer that morning, had tried to coax Max into her patrol car for animal control processing, but something in his eyes had stopped her, a depth of purpose that seemed almost human. This wasn't a lost dog. This was a soldier maintaining his post. Present day, now. As Sarah watched Max's unwavering focus on Eleanor's empty house, she wondered if she'd made the right choice in protecting him from animal control. The neighbors had been patient, the city surprisingly accommodating. But winter was coming, and Max's health was declining. His military pension, yes, Eleanor had somehow managed to get him classified as a veteran with benefits, covered his food and medical care, but it couldn't protect him from the elements or the growing pressure to resolve his situation. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there, boy?" Sarah murmured, studying his profile in the fading afternoon light. "Eleanor knew it too. That's why she left you those instructions." She pulled the letter from her jacket pocket, Eleanor's final message, discovered in her safety deposit box, along with Max's military records and a substantial trust fund designated for his care. The letter had been brief, but specific, if anything. Happens to me, Max must stay near the house. He'll know when it's time to go. Trust him. He sees things we don't. At the time, Sarah had assumed it was the ramblings of an elderly woman too attached to her pet. Now, after watching Max's disciplined vigil for nearly 3 years, she wasn't so sure. Max's ears swiveled toward her, then back to the house. His breathing changed, shorter, more focused. Whatever he was sensing, it was getting stronger. Sarah's radio crackled. Unit 47, we've got a 1054 at 1247 Maple Street. Neighbors reporting suspicious activity. Sarah's blood chilled. That was Eleanor's address. She grabbed her radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I'm already on scene. What kind of suspicious activity? Caller, reports seeing lights in the upstairs windows. House has been vacant for months. Max was already on his feet, moving toward the house with the fluid grace of his military training. For the first time in 1,000 days, he was breaking his vigil, but he wasn't abandoning his post. He was advancing on it. The spare key was exactly where Eleanor had told Sarah it would be, under the third loose brick in the back garden wall, wrapped in a plastic bag that had kept it dry through 3 seasons of weather. Max pressed close to Sarah's side as she unlocked the back door, his body tense with an alertness she hadn't seen since his military service records. "Stay close, boy," Sarah whispered, though she realized the absurdity of giving commands to a dog who'd been trained by Army Rangers. If anything, Max was better equipped for this kind of situation than she was. The house smelled of dust and absence, but underneath that, Sarah detected something else. Something recent, a cologne she couldn't identify, the faint residue of cigarette smoke, and fear. It sounded crazy, but she'd been a cop long enough to know that fear had its own scent. Max's nose was working overtime, his head turning as he processed dozens of smells that were invisible to Sarah. His hackles were raised, but he wasn't growling, a sign that whatever he'd detected wasn't immediately threatening. Yet. They moved through Eleanor's kitchen, past the small dining room, where her china still sat in the hutch, exactly as she'd left it. The living room was undisturbed, Max's old bed still positioned near Eleanor's favorite armchair. But as they approached the staircase, Max stopped. He sat down and looked at Sarah expectantly, his tail giving the slightest twitch. It was a behavior she'd seen before, his way of asking permission before proceeding to a potentially dangerous area. Even in civilian life, his military discipline remained intact. "Go ahead, Max. Check it out." Max bounded up the stairs with surprising speed for a dog his age, his nails clicking against the hardwood. Sarah followed more cautiously, her hand on her weapon, using her flashlight to illuminate the narrow hallway. Eleanor's bedroom door was ajar. She remembered it being closed when she'd helped process the scene 3 years ago. Max pushed it open with his nose and disappeared inside. Sarah heard him moving around, investigating corners and checking under the bed with the thoroughness of a trained detection specialist. But it was what Sarah saw next that made her blood run cold. The dust on Eleanor's dresser had been disturbed, not dramatically. Whoever had been here was careful, but Sarah had learned to notice details. Items had been moved and replaced, drawers opened and closed, and near the window, footprints in the dust. Size 10 boots from the look of them. "Max, come here," Sarah called softly. The German Shepherd appeared at her side, his attention focused on the same area Sarah was examining. He sniffed the footprints, then looked up at her with an expression that seemed almost accusatory, as if he was saying, "I told you so." Sarah's radio crackled again. "Unit 47, what's your status?" she keyed, the microphone keeping her voice low. "Still investigating, requesting backup for a possible B&E. Copy that. Unit 23 is en route. But as Sarah waited for backup, Max began exhibiting behavior she'd never seen before. He walked to Eleanor's closet and sat down, staring at the closed door with the same intensity he'd shown during his 1,000-day vigil. When Sarah opened the closet, Max immediately went to the back corner and began pawing at the floorboards. One of them was loose. Sarah knelt beside Max and pried up the board with her pocket knife. Underneath was a small space that had been hollowed out years ago, a hiding place that Eleanor had never mentioned to anyone. Inside was a metal box, covered in dust but obviously recently disturbed. The box was locked, but the lock had been broken. Recently. Sarah opened it carefully, Max peering over her shoulder as if he understood the significance of what they'd found. Inside were documents, old legal papers, photographs, and letters tied with a faded ribbon. But what caught Sarah's attention was what was missing. The bottom of the box had an indentation, as if something rectangular and substantial had been stored there for years. Whatever it was gone now. Max whined softly, the first vocal sound he'd made in months. He pawed at the empty space in the box, then looked at Sarah with an expression of urgency she'd never seen in a domestic animal. What was here, boy? What did they take? Before Max could provide whatever answer a dog could give, Sarah heard the front door open downstairs. Heavy footsteps moving with purpose, but her backup wasn't supposed to arrive for another 10 minutes. Max's entire demeanor changed. His ears flattened against his head, his lips pulled back in a silent snarl, and his body coiled into an attack position. This wasn't the alert behavior he'd shown earlier. This was pure, trained aggression. Someone was in the house who didn't belong there. Sarah drew her weapon and moved to the bedroom doorway, Max staying precisely at her left heel, the position he'd been trained to maintain during military operations. The footsteps were coming up the stairs now, slow and deliberate. "Police! Identify yourself!" Sarah called out. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the house was silent, except for the sound of Sarah's heartbeat and Max's controlled breathing. Then the footsteps resumed, faster now, moving away from the stairs and toward the back of the house. Sarah heard the back door slam. By the time she and Max reached the kitchen, whoever had been in the house was gone. But they'd left something behind, a cigarette butt on Eleanor's counter, still warm to the touch. Max sniffed the cigarette butt, and his hackles rose even higher. He knew that scent, and from the way he was looking at Sarah, she realized that Max had been waiting for this moment for 1,000 days, not waiting for Eleanor to return, but waiting for whoever had just been in this house to come back. Eleanor had been right. Max did see things they didn't, and what he'd seen was danger. Officer Tom Bradley arrived just as Sarah was securing the scene, his patrol car's headlights cutting through the growing dusk. Max had positioned himself in the backyard, nose to the ground, following a scent trail that only he could detect. "What have we got, Chen?" Bradley asked, his hand unconsciously moving to his weapon as he took in Sarah's tense posture. "Someone's been watching this place," Sarah replied, showing him the disturbed dust upstairs. They knew exactly what they were looking for. This wasn't random, it was targeted. Bradley had been partnered with Sarah for 5 years and trusted her instincts, but his skepticism showed as he watched Max methodically working the perimeter of Eleanor's garden. "And you figured this out because of the dog?" "The dog's been trying to tell us for 3 years, Sarah said, more convinced now than ever that Max's vigil had been about protection, not grief. "Look at this." She led Bradley upstairs and showed him the hidden compartment, the broken lock, the missing contents. Eleanor Hartwell was hiding something valuable enough that someone waited until they thought the coast was clear to come looking for it. "But why wait so long? She's been dead for 1,000 days, Sarah finished. "Exactly as long as Max has been standing guard. Don't you think that's quite a coincidence?" As if summoned by his name, Max appeared in the bedroom doorway. He'd Found something in the backyard, a small piece of fabric caught on Eleanor's fence. He dropped it at Sarah's feet and sat back expectantly. Sarah examined the fabric with her flashlight. Dark wool, expensive-looking, with a distinctive weave. Not the kind of material you'd find in Eleanor's middle-class neighborhood. Torn from a suit jacket, Bradley observed. Fresh Tier 2. Whoever was here snagged it climbing the fence. Max's tail gave a single, sharp wag, his version of confirmation. He'd been trained to find evidence, and even in retirement, those skills remained sharp, but it was what happened next that changed everything. Max walked to Eleanor's dresser and sat down beside a framed photograph Sarah had noticed but not really looked at before. It showed Eleanor as a much younger woman, maybe in her 30s, standing beside a tall man in a military uniform. Behind them was a building Sarah didn't recognize, but the photo had the formal quality of an official occasion. Max pawed at the photograph gently, then looked at Sarah with the same urgent expression he'd shown at the hidden compartment. Sarah picked up the frame and examined it more closely. The back was held in place with small metal clasps, and when she opened it, she found something that made her breath catch. There was a second photograph hidden behind the first one. This one showed Eleanor, slightly older, standing with a group of people in what looked like a courtroom. The image was black and white, dated 1987, and Eleanor was holding a briefcase. She looked official, professional, nothing like the gentle retired teacher Sarah had known, but it was the man standing behind Eleanor in the photo that made Max whine softly. Even in the grainy image, Sarah could see the family resemblance, the same sharp jawline, the same calculating eyes she'd seen in... "Bradley, run a background check on Eleanor Hartwell," Sarah said quietly. "Full workup. I don't think she was just a retired teacher." While Bradley made the call, Sarah continued examining the hidden photograph. Eleanor was younger here, maybe 45, and she was clearly in some kind of official capacity. The briefcase, the formal attire, the courthouse setting, it all suggested legal work. But what kind of legal work would someone want to keep hidden for over 30 years? Max had moved to Eleanor's nightstand and was pawing at the bottom drawer. When Sarah opened it, she found more photographs, these ones loose and apparently forgotten. Eleanor through the years, but always in professional settings, meeting with serious-looking men in suits, standing beside government buildings, shaking hands with people whose faces Sarah almost recognized. One photograph stopped her cold. Eleanor, probably in her 50s now, standing beside a man whose face Sarah definitely recognized from old newspaper articles. He'd been a state senator back in the 90s, involved in some kind of corruption, scandal that had ended his political career, but the timestamp on this photo suggested it had been taken years before the scandal broke. Eleanor had known about the corruption before it became public. "Chen, you need to hear this," Bradley called from downstairs. Eleanor Hartwell wasn't a teacher. She was a paralegal who worked for the State Attorney General's office for 25 years, retired in 1995 after working on some kind of classified investigation. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. Eleanor hadn't just been a sweet old lady who'd rescued a traumatized war dog. She'd been a keeper of secrets, dangerous secrets that someone had spent 3 years trying to recover. And Max, with his military training and protective instincts, had somehow understood that those secrets were still worth guarding. "Bradley, I need you to contact the state AG's office. Find out what Eleanor Hartwell was working on when she retired and see if there are any open cases that might be connected." But even as Sarah made the request, she realized they might already be too late. Whoever had broken into Eleanor's house tonight had been looking for something specific, and the empty space in that hidden box suggested they might have found it. Max was standing at the window now, looking out at the street with the same focused attention he'd maintained for 1,000 days. But his posture was different, not waiting anymore, but watching, anticipating, as if he knew that whoever had come for Eleanor's secrets would be back, and next time they might not be satisfied with just documents. The call came at 3:17 a.m. Sarah had been dozing in her patrol car outside Eleanor's house. Max curled in the passenger seat. The first time in 1,000 days he'd been willing to leave his post. The ringing of her cell phone shattered the quiet night, and Max was instantly alert, his ears pricked and scanning for threats. Detective Chen? The voice was unfamiliar, elderly, with a slight tremor that spoke of both age and fear. "This is Officer Chen. Who is this?" "My name is Margaret Walsh. I worked with Eleanor Hartwell back in the 80s. I saw the news report about the break-in at her house." Sarah sat up straighter. There hadn't been any news reports. They'd kept the investigation quiet. "What news report?" A pause. "Maybe I was mistaken, but, Officer Chen, if someone is looking for what I think they're looking for, you're all in terrible danger." Max was staring at the phone as if he could sense the tension in the caller's voice. His hackles were beginning to rise. "Mrs. Walsh, I think we need to meet. Can you—" "No, not over the phone, not in public. There's a diner on Route 9, about 20 miles south of your town, Mel's Truck Stop. I'll be there at 6 a.m. in the back booth. Come alone and bring Eleanor's dog. He'll need to hear this too." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, her mind racing. How did this woman know about Max? And what could a dog possibly need to hear? But as she looked at Max, she saw something that made her reconsider her skepticism. The German Shepherd was sitting at perfect attention, his gaze fixed on the road, leading away from Eleanor's house. Not watching for threats this time, watching for opportunity, as if he'd been waiting for this call. Mel's Truck Stop, 5:58 a.m. Margaret. Walsh was exactly what Sarah had expected, a woman in her 70s with steel-grey hair and eyes that had seen too much. She was sitting in the back booth as promised, nursing a cup of coffee that looked like it had gone cold hours ago. What Sarah hadn't expected was Max's reaction. The moment they walked into the diner, Max pulled against his leash, not aggressively, but with purpose. He led Sarah directly to Margaret's booth and sat down beside the older woman, resting his massive head on her lap as if they were old friends. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she stroked Max's fur. "Hello, beautiful boy. Eleanor told me so much about you." "You knew Eleanor personally?" Sarah asked, sliding into the booth across from them. "For over 40 years. We worked together on the Kellerman investigation." Margaret's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "That's why someone broke into her house. They're looking for the insurance policy." "Insurance policy?" Margaret glanced around the diner, making sure they couldn't be overheard. The early morning crowd was sparse. A few truckers, a couple of shift workers heading home, but she still kept her voice low. "In 1987, we uncovered evidence of a massive corruption ring involving state contracts, kickbacks, and at least 3 murders. The investigation was shut down before we could present it to a grand jury. Orders came from way up the chain. Someone with enough power to bury the whole thing." Max lifted his head from Margaret's lap and looked directly at Sarah as if he understood every word. "Eleanor and I were ordered to destroy all the evidence," Margaret continued. "But Eleanor, she was smarter than they gave her credit for. She kept copies of everything. Photos, documents, recorded phone conversations. She called it her insurance policy, evidence that would keep her safe as long as the people involved thought it was still out there." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. How many people knew about this insurance policy? Just Eleanor, me, and... Margaret's voice caught. "And David Kellerman, Eleanor's nephew. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. David Kellerman, the distant nephew who'd been fighting the estate in probate court, who'd been pressuring the city to remove Max from the property, who'd had access to Eleanor's house keys and would know about her hiding places. "He's been waiting," Sarah said quietly, "waiting for Max to give up his guard so he could search the house safely." "But Max never gave up," Margaret said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Eleanor always said he was the smartest dog she'd ever known. She used to joke that he understood everything she told him, especially the important stuff." As if responding to the compliment, Max's tail gave a single thump against the booth seat. But his attention was focused on the diner's front window, and Sarah followed his gaze to see a familiar car pulling into the parking lot. David Kellerman, mid-40s, expensive suit despite the early hour, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been caught. "He followed us," Sarah breathed, her hand moving instinctively to her weapon, but Max was already moving. Not toward the threat, but positioning himself between Margaret and the front door. His military training had kicked in. Protect the asset, control the perimeter. Kellerman walked into the diner with the casual air of someone who belonged there, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes swept the room. Before settling on their booth, he'd been watching, waiting for exactly this kind of meeting. "Officer Chen," he said, approaching their table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What a coincidence running into you here. And Margaret, it's been years." Margaret's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "Hello, David." "I hope you're not filling the officer's head with old stories," Kellerman said, sliding uninvited into the booth beside Sarah. Aunt Eleanor always had such an active imagination in her later years. Max's growl was so low it was barely audible, but Sarah felt it vibrate through the floor. The dog's eyes were locked on Kellerman with an intensity that made the man shift uncomfortably. "Your aunt left some interesting things behind," Sarah said carefully, watching Kellerman's reaction. His smile faltered for just a moment. "I'm sure she did. Eleanor was quite the pack rat. I've been meaning to sort through her belongings, but that dog of hers makes it difficult." "Max is protective of Eleanor's property," Sarah agreed. "Almost like he knows something we don't." Kellerman's laugh was forced. "Dogs can't know anything beyond basic commands, Officer Chen, though I suppose some people like to anthropomorphize their pets." But as he spoke, Max rose to his feet and moved to the end of the booth, blocking Kellerman's exit. It wasn't aggressive yet, but the message was clear. The conversation wasn't over. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "Eleanor asked me to give this to someone in law enforcement if anything ever happened to her. I guess now is the time." Kellerman's composure finally cracked. "Margaret, you don't know what you're doing. That investigation was closed for good reasons. People died because they couldn't let sleeping dogs lie. People died because you killed them," Margaret said quietly, "and Eleanor had proof." The envelope contained photocopies, bank records, photographs, transcripts of recorded conversations. 35 years of evidence that David Kellerman had been involved in corruption, bribery and murder, protected all this time by Eleanor's careful guardianship. Kellerman's hand moved toward his jacket, but Max was faster. The German shepherd placed himself directly in front of the man, and for the first time in 3 years, his lips pulled back to reveal teeth that had been trained to kill. "I wouldn't," Sarah said softly, her own weapon now drawn and hidden beneath the table. "Max has been waiting 1,000 days for this moment. I don't think you want to find out what he's prepared to do." Kellerman's eyes darted between Sarah's steady gaze and Max's bared fangs, and Sarah saw the exact moment when he realized that his long game had finally been exposed. The dog had kept faith with his handler's secrets. Now it was time for justice. The tension in Mel's truck stop stretched like a wire, ready to snap. David Kellerman sat frozen, his hand still halfway to his jacket, while Max maintained his protective stance with the patience of a trained soldier. Sarah kept her weapon steady beneath the table, But it was Margaret who broke the silence. "Tell her about the Riverside construction contracts, David," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades-held secrets. "Tell her about the judges you bought, the inspectors you bribed, and the whistleblowers who ended up dead." Kellerman's face had gone ashen. "You don't understand the full picture, Margaret. Eleanor didn't understand either. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." "Eleanor understood perfectly," Margaret replied, pulling more documents from the envelope. "She spent 35 years documenting everything, every payoff, every threat, every accident that silenced someone who got too close to the truth." Sarah studied the photocopied bank records Margaret handed her. Kellerman's name appeared on dozens of transactions, payments flowing through shell companies and dummy corporations. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars in bribes and kickbacks spanning decades. But it was the photographs that made Sarah's blood run cold. Black and white surveillance photos showing Kellerman meeting with known criminals, handshakes outside construction sites, envelopes changing hands in parking garages. Eleanor had been thorough, patient, building an airtight case that could destroy not just Kellerman, but an entire network of corruption. "The Riverside Elementary School collapse," Sarah whispered, recognizing one of the construction sites. 12 children died when that building came down. "Substandard materials," Margaret confirmed. Kellerman's company saved $200,000 using inferior concrete. Eleanor had the lab reports proving it, the inspector's original findings. Before they were altered, even recordings of Kellerman arranging the cover-up. Max's ears twitched at the emotion in Margaret's voice, and he pressed closer to her side, offering comfort, while never taking his eyes off Kellerman. The dog seemed to understand that this conversation was about justice, something his military training had prepared him to protect. "Those children's deaths weren't accidents," Sarah said, the pieces falling into place. "They were murder." Kellerman finally found his voice. "You're talking about events from 40 years ago, people who are long dead. What's the point of dredging this up now?" "The point," Margaret said firmly, "is that you never stopped. Eleanor kept watching, kept documenting, even after she retired, even after she moved to that little house on Maple Street. She knew you were still out there, still hurting people." Sarah flipped through more documents, finding records that were much more recent. Kellerman's current construction company, still cutting corners, still bribing inspectors. A nursing home that had collapsed just 2 years ago, killing 8 elderly residents. A bridge project where safety regulations had been ignored, resulting in 3 worker deaths. Eleanor was building a new case, Sarah realized. She was going to expose everything. "She tried," Margaret said, tears flowing freely now. "She contacted the FBI 6 months before she died, but somehow Kellerman found out. Eleanor called me the night before her heart attack, said someone had been following her, that she was scared they'd gotten to her doctors." Max whined softly, a sound of pure grief that seemed to encompass not just Eleanor's death, but all the victims whose stories were spread across the table. He'd been more than Eleanor's companion. He'd been her partner in seeking justice. "You killed her," Sarah said to Kellerman, the words coming out flat and certain. "I never touched Eleanor," Kellerman protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Her heart gave out. She was old, sick. Her medication was tampered with," Margaret interrupted. "Eleanor had been taking the same heart medication for 15 years, with no problems. Then suddenly, 6 months after she contacted the FBI, she starts having episodes. Dizzy spells, irregular heartbeat, fatigue. Her doctor increased her dosage twice before she died." Sarah looked at Max, understanding flooding through her. "That's why you wouldn't leave the house. You knew something was wrong. You were protecting the evidence." Max's tail gave a single, deliberate thump. In his simple canine way, he'd been doing what his military training had taught him: maintain the mission, protect the objective, never abandon your post. "Eleanor left me one final message. Margaret continued, reaching into her purse for her cell phone. She recorded it 3 days before she died, asked me to only play it if something happened to her. Margaret's fingers trembled as she navigated to the voice message and hit play. Eleanor's familiar voice filled the tense silence of the diner, tinged with exhaustion and fear, but still strong with purpose. Margaret, if you're hearing this, then David found a way to silence me. I want you to know that Max understands everything. I've told him where the evidence is hidden, what it means, why it's important. He's been trained to protect and serve, and he'll keep protecting Eleanor's secrets until someone worthy comes to claim them. Don't let them put him down, Margaret. He's the only witness left who can't be bought or threatened or killed. He's my insurance policy now. The message ended, and the diner fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic on Route 9. Max had moved closer to Sarah during the recording, and now he sat pressed against her leg, his warm weight offering comfort and strength. She trained him, Sarah whispered in amazement. Eleanor taught Max what to guard and why. Military dogs are incredibly intelligent, Margaret explained. Eleanor researched his training, learned how to communicate with him in ways he'd understand. She turned him into a living, breathing, safe deposit box. Kellerman made a sudden move toward the diner's back exit, but Max was ready. The German Shepherd bounded over the booth seat and positioned himself in front of the rear door, his entire body radiating controlled aggression. Years of civilian life hadn't dulled his tactical awareness. "You're not leaving," Sarah said, her weapon now openly displayed. "David Kellerman, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and murder." But as Sarah reached for her handcuffs, Kellerman's desperation finally broke through his composed facade. "You have no idea what you're unleashing," he snarled. "Eleanor's evidence doesn't just implicate me. There are judges, politicians, police commissioners, people with the power to make you disappear, just like they made her disappear. Then we'd better make sure this evidence gets to the right people," Sarah replied calmly. Max barked once, sharp, authoritative, and began moving toward the diner's front door. Not fleeing, but leading. He stopped at the entrance and looked back at Sarah expectantly. He had more to show them. The caravan back to Eleanor's house was surreal, Sarah's patrol car leading, followed by Margaret in her aging Honda, with backup units falling in behind them. Max rode shotgun in Sarah's car, his attention fixed on their destination with laser focus. Whatever Eleanor had trained him to protect, they were about to discover it. "Unit 47, be advised we have multiple vehicles approaching your location." Dispatch crackled over the radio. "Black SUVs, no plates visible." Sarah's blood chilled. Kellerman had been right about one thing. The conspiracy was bigger than just him. Someone with serious resources was moving to contain the situation. All units, potential hostile situation developing. Request immediate backup from county and state. But as they turned onto Maple Street, Sarah realized they might be too late. 3 black SUVs were already parked outside Eleanor's house, and men in expensive suits were positioning themselves around the property perimeter. These weren't local thugs. They moved with the precision and confidence of professionals. Max began growling low in his throat, but it wasn't the aggressive sound he'd made at Kellerman. This was different, deeper, more primal. The sound of a predator recognizing worthy opponents. Sarah parked 2 blocks away and called for a tactical team, but the nearest unit was 20 minutes out. Margaret pulled up beside them, her face pale with fear. "They've been waiting for this moment," Margaret said through her open window, "waiting for someone to force their hand." Max jumped out of the patrol car before Sarah could stop him, but he didn't charge toward the house. Instead, he led them on a circuitous route through neighboring backyards, using fences and landscaping for cover. His military training was fully engaged now, reconnaissance, tactical movement, objective assessment. They reached Eleanor's back fence and crouched behind the garden shed. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see at least 4 men systematically, Searching the house, they worked with professional efficiency, checking the same hiding places Sarah and Max had discovered earlier. "They're looking for the original documents," Margaret whispered. "The photocopies I have are damning, but the originals would include audio recordings, video evidence, documents that could bring down half the state government." Max was studying the house with intense concentration, his head tilted as if listening to sounds beyond human perception. Then he did something extraordinary. He began digging at a specific spot near Eleanor's rose bushes. "Max, what are you—" Sarah started to say, but Margaret grabbed her arm. "Eleanor's final hiding place," she breathed. "She told me she'd buried something where Max would know to find it." The German shepherd's powerful claws made quick work of the soft earth, and within minutes he'd unearthed a waterproof container about the size of a shoebox. Inside were flash drives, original photographs, and a thick folder of documents that made Margaret gasp. "The Kellerman files," she whispered. "Eleanor's complete investigation. Everything." But their discovery hadn't gone unnoticed. One of the men in suits had spotted them from the kitchen window and was already moving toward the back door, speaking urgently into a radio. "We need to go," Sarah said, but Max had other plans. The German shepherd grabbed the container in his powerful jaws and began running, not away from the house but toward it. He bounded through Eleanor's back door before the suited man could react, carrying Eleanor's final evidence directly into the heart of enemy territory. "Max, no!" Sarah shouted, but she knew it was too late to stop him. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation that Max had clearly been planning for 1,000 days. The dog moved through Eleanor's house like a guided missile, avoiding the searchers in the main rooms and heading directly for the basement. Sarah and Margaret followed as closely as they dared, using the confusion Max had created to slip inside undetected. In the basement, Max went to a specific spot near the old furnace and dropped the evidence container. Then he began barking. Not random noise, but a specific pattern. 3 short barks, pause, 3 long barks, pause, 3 short barks. SOS in Morse code. "He's signaling for help," Sarah realized, just as the basement filled with the sound of heavy footsteps above them. But Max's message wasn't just for Sarah. Within minutes, the house was surrounded by police cars, FBI vehicles, and news vans. Someone, Sarah suspected Margaret, had been making phone calls during their journey back to Maple Street. The men in suits found themselves trapped in a house that had become the center of a media circus, with a trained military dog guarding, evidence that could end their careers and send them to prison. The standoff lasted 3 hours. During that time, Max never left his position guarding Eleanor's evidence. The men upstairs tried to negotiate, threatened, even attempted to use tear gas, but the German shepherd's resolve was unshakable. He'd been given a mission by Eleanor, and he would complete it or die trying. Finally, as news helicopters circled overhead and reporters broadcast live updates, the FBI tactical team moved in. The men in suits surrendered without a fight. They were politicians and bureaucrats, not soldiers, and they understood when they were beaten. David Kellerman was led away in handcuffs, his corruption network exposed and crumbling around him. But it was the sight of Max, still sitting guard over Eleanor's evidence as FBI agents carefully collected it, that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. For 1,000 days, this dog had maintained faith with a dead woman's mission for justice. Now finally, his watch was ending. The story exploded across national media within hours. War Dog's 1,000-day vigil exposes decades of corruption, led the evening news on every major network. Max's photograph, sitting stoically beside Eleanor's evidence container, became an overnight symbol of loyalty, duty, and unwavering integrity. Sarah found herself at the center of a media frenzy she hadn't anticipated. Reporters wanted to know about Max's military service, his relationship with Eleanor, how a dog had managed to guard evidence that had eluded professional investigators for decades. The remarkable thing isn't that Max understood what Eleanor needed him to do, Sarah told a CNN reporter 3 days after the arrests. The remarkable thing is that he never wavered in his commitment, even when everyone around him thought he was just a grieving pet. The FBI investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Eleanor's evidence led to 47 indictments, including 3 sitting judges, 2 state senators, and the former police commissioner. The Riverside construction scandal was reopened, bringing justice to families who had waited 40 years for answers about their children's deaths. Margaret Walsh became the star witness in the federal case, her testimony providing context and credibility to Eleanor's meticulously gathered evidence. She spoke eloquently about her friend's courage, her dedication to justice, and her final act of training a war dog to become the guardian of truth. But it was Max who captured the public's imagination. Veterans groups across the country rallied to honor him. The American Legion awarded him their highest civilian honor. The Military Working Dog Foundation declared him their Hero of the Year. Children sent letters to Sarah's police station, drawings of Max surrounded by hearts and American flags. "He's not just a dog," one 8-year-old wrote in crayon. "He's a soldier who never forgot his promise." The City Council unanimously passed a resolution declaring Max an honorary citizen, granting him permanent residency rights and a lifetime pension from the police department. The mayor presented him with a key to the city in a ceremony that drew thousands of spectators. Through it all, Max seemed to understand that his vigil had ended successfully. He was more relaxed now, more willing to accept attention and affection from strangers. But Sarah noticed that he still looked toward Eleanor's house sometimes, as if checking to make sure his mission truly was complete. The house itself became an unexpected pilgrimage site. People left flowers on Eleanor's front steps, small American flags in the garden where Max had maintained his watch. The new owners, a young family who had bought the property after the estate was finally settled, embraced the attention, even installing a small memorial plaque near Max's old post. Eleanor Hartwell and Max, Guardians of Justice. It read with the dates of Eleanor's life and a paw print pressed into the bronze. David Kellerman's trial dominated headlines for months. The evidence Eleanor had collected was overwhelming. Bank records, photographs, audio recordings that painted a picture of corruption so extensive it reached into every level of state government. Kellerman himself, faced with the impossibility of denying what Max had helped expose, finally confessed to his role in the conspiracy, but he maintained his innocence in Eleanor's death. "I never killed her," he insisted during his testimony. "I wanted to. God help me, but I never actually did it." It was Margaret who provided the final piece of that puzzle. During her own testimony, she revealed that Eleanor had been investigating not just corruption, but murder. Specifically, the suspicious deaths of several other people who had threatened to expose the conspiracy over the years. Eleanor had discovered a pattern in their medical records, evidence that their medications had been tampered with just as hers had been. Eleanor wasn't David's first victim, Margaret told the hushed courtroom. She was just the smartest. Smart enough to prepare for her own murder and smart enough to train a dog to make sure her killers couldn't escape justice. The revelation sent shockwaves through the legal community. If Eleanor's suspicions were correct, the conspiracy had been covering its tracks with murder for decades, making their crimes even more heinous than originally thought. Kellerman was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without parole, convicted not just of corruption, but of conspiracy to commit murder in multiple cases. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 20 to 40 years. Their political careers and reputations destroyed by a dog's refusal to abandon his post. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came during the sentencing hearing, when the judge specifically acknowledged Max's role in bringing the criminals to justice. This court recognizes that without the extraordinary loyalty and intelligence of Eleanor Hartwell's companion, Max, these crimes might never have been exposed, Judge Patricia Morrison said from the bench. His 1,000-day vigil stands as a testament to the power of unwavering dedication to justice. Max, who had been allowed into the courtroom as an honorary witness, gave a single soft bark at the judge's words. Even he seemed to understand that justice had finally been served. 6 months after the trials ended, Sarah found herself back on Maple Street, standing in front of Eleanor's house, with Max at her side. The memorial plaque gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and fresh flowers, left by visitors from around the country, decorated the small garden. The young family who now owned the house had invited Sarah and Max for dinner, wanting to meet the famous dog who had made their property a landmark. Their 8-year-old daughter Emma had been particularly insistent about meeting her hero. "Is it weird for him to be back here?" Emma asked, kneeling beside Max and stroking his graying fur. At nearly 12 years old, Max was showing his age, but his eyes remained bright and alert. "I think he finds it peaceful now," Sarah replied, watching as Max sniffed around his old post near the front steps. There was no tension in his posture, no urgent watchfulness, just the calm satisfaction of a job well done. Emma's parents, Tom and Linda Chen, no relation to Sarah, had done something beautiful with Eleanor's house. They'd preserved her garden, maintained her rose bushes, and even kept some of her furniture after finding it in storage. The house felt lived in and loved again, but Eleanor's memory remained respectfully intact. "We found something when we were cleaning out the attic," Linda said, returning from inside the house with a small wooden box. "The previous owners missed it, but Emma's ball rolled up there, and when I went to get it, inside the box were more letters, tied with the same faded ribbon Sarah remembered from Eleanor's hidden documents. But these weren't evidence or legal papers. They were personal correspondence between Eleanor and various military organizations, letters about Max's service record, his medals, his need for a peaceful retirement. One letter, dated just a month before Eleanor's death, made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. "To whom it may concern, I am writing to ensure that if anything happens to me, my companion Max receives the recognition and care he deserves. He is not just a pet. He is a decorated veteran who has served his country with honor and distinction. He has protected me as faithfully as he once protected his fellow soldiers, and I know he will continue protecting what matters long after I'm gone." Max understands more than people realize. He knows right from wrong, truth from lies, justice from corruption. I have shared with him the burden of secrets that must be preserved for the greater good. If something happens to me, trust Max's instincts. He will know what to do. Please don't let anyone convince you that he's just a dog. He's a soldier, a guardian, and the best partner I could have asked for in my final mission. With deepest respect, Eleanor Hartwell. Sarah wiped her eyes, understanding. Finally, why Eleanor had been so confident that Max would guard her secrets. She hadn't just trained him to protect evidence. She'd explained to him why it mattered. She really talked to him like he could understand everything, Emma observed, having listened to Sarah read the letter aloud. "Maybe he could," Sarah said, looking at Max, who was now lying contentedly in a patch of sunlight near Eleanor's rose bushes. "Maybe understanding isn't just about language." As the afternoon wore on, other visitors arrived to pay their respects. Margaret Walsh, now in her late 70s, but still sharp, brought updates on the ongoing legal proceedings against the corruption network. Several veterans from Max's old unit had driven in from out of state, wanting to honor their four-legged comrade. But the most meaningful visit came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison's parents, Max's original handler's family, had seen the news coverage and made the trip from North Carolina. They were elderly now, Jake's father walking with a cane, but their eyes lit up when they saw Max. "He looks good," Jake's mother said, tears streaming down her face as Max gently nuzzled her hand. "Jake would be so proud of what he's accomplished." "Jake is proud," his father added firmly. "I don't care what anyone says about heaven or the afterlife. Jake knows what Max did here. He knows his partner never forgot his duty." Max's tail wagged slowly at the mention of Jake's name, and for a moment Sarah could see the young military dog he'd once been, eager and devoted and ready to serve. The gathering naturally evolved into an impromptu memorial service, not just for Eleanor, but for all the victims of the corruption Max had helped expose. Margaret shared stories about Eleanor's quiet courage. The veterans talked about military dogs they'd served with. Emma read a poem she'd written about loyalty and bravery. As the sun began to set, the crowd gradually dispersed, leaving Sarah alone with Max in Eleanor's garden. The dog seemed content to stay, lying peacefully among the roses Eleanor had tended, but Sarah could tell he was ready to leave when she was. "Come on, boy," she said gently. "Time to go home." Max rose slowly. His arthritis was bothering him more lately, and followed Sarah to her car. But at the gate he stopped and looked back at the house one final time. Sarah followed his gaze and gasped. For just a moment, in the upstairs window where they'd first seen that mysterious shadow, a figure seemed to appear. An elderly woman, with silver hair, smiling down at them with infinite love and gratitude. "Eleanor." Sarah blinked and the figure was gone. Just afternoon sunlight and empty glass, but Max's tail was wagging furiously, and he gave a single joyful bark, the first truly happy sound Sarah had heard from him in over 3 years. He'd seen her too, 2 years later. Sarah knelt beside Max's favorite spot in her backyard, the morning sun casting long shadows across the grass where he'd spent his final months in peace. The cancer had taken him quickly, a blessing, the veterinarian had said, for a dog who'd already given so much. In her hands, Sarah held the letter that had arrived that morning, forwarded from the police station. It was from a little girl in California whose school had studied Max's story, whose class had raised money for a memorial statue to be placed in Eleanor's garden. "Dear Officer Chen, my teacher told us about Max and how he waited for so long to make sure the bad people got caught. She said he never forgot his promise to Eleanor, even when everyone thought he was just being sad. I think Max knew something grown-ups don't always remember, that keeping promises is the most important thing you can do, even when it's really, really hard. We hope our statue will help other people remember Max and Eleanor, and maybe help them keep their promises too. Love, Sophie, age 7. Sarah smiled through her tears, imagining Max's reaction to being immortalized in bronze. He'd probably have been embarrassed by all the attention, but pleased that his story might inspire others to stand guard over what mattered most. The memorial statue was unveiled on a crisp October morning, exactly 3 years to the day after Eleanor's death. It showed Max in his characteristic sitting position, alert and watchful, with Eleanor's hand resting gently on his head. The inscription read simply, "Some promises transcend death, and some guardians never abandon their post." As Sarah placed a wreath at the base of the statue, she thought about legacy, how one elderly woman's courage and one loyal dog's devotion had rippled outward to touch thousands of lives, to bring justice to victims who'd waited decades for answers, to remind everyone who heard their story that integrity was worth any sacrifice. The crowd began to disperse, but Sarah lingered, studying Max's bronze features and remembering the living, breathing hero who'd changed her understanding of loyalty forever. A young couple with a German Shepherd puppy approached the memorial, the woman reading the inscription aloud to her companion. The puppy, perhaps sensing something significant about this place, sat perfectly still beside the statue, his young face turned upward as if seeking wisdom from the bronze guardian above. Sarah smiled and walked away, leaving the next generation to discover what Max and Eleanor had known all along, that love, loyalty, and the courage to do what's right never truly die. They simply wait, patient and eternal, for the next worthy soul to carry them forward. 5 years after Max's death, the Eleanor Hartwell Foundation for Justice was established, providing legal aid to whistleblowers and funding for K-9 veteran programs. The foundation's logo featured Max's profile, and their motto came from Eleanor's final letter: "Truth has the most faithful guardians." Sarah Chen went on to become chief of police, implementing programs that paired retired military dogs with elderly citizens who needed companions. She never forgot the lesson Max taught her, that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with unwavering dedication to what's right. And on quiet nights, when Sarah walked past Eleanor's house on Maple Street, she sometimes caught a glimpse of movement in the garden, a shadow that might have been moonlight or might have been a faithful dog still keeping watch over the truth. Either way, she always smiled.